sure that everyone can hear me well and, great, thanks. Okay, so I'm gonna go to my share screen here and open up can everybody see that too? Fantastic. Okay. So, as Tracy said, my name is Maggie Nettesheim-Hoffman. I am the Associate Director of Career Diversity for the Humanities Without Walls Consortium. And very briefly, I'm going to get a little bit into what HWW is in the second half of my presentation. But very briefly, Humanities Without Walls is a consortium of 16 Midwestern universities based at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And we were formed in 2014 through a number of series of different grants from the Andrew Mellon Foundation. So I quickly just want to say thanks to the Mellon Foundation for the support of the consortium's work, and to my full team and my colleagues at the University of Illinois for their support and collegiality in the work that we lead. As a part of this work, I am also the director of the Career Diversity Initiative at Marquette University, which is a collaborative project based at Marquette between our graduate school, our College of the Arts and Sciences, and our Center for the Advancement of the Humanities at Marquette. And as I go through my own personal career story, I will share a little bit about what that is and how that came about. I also liked kind of this mountain image because or actually, I think it's the Painted Desert. My grandmother lived in Tucson, Arizona. So even though I'm based in the Northwoods of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and in the Great Lakes region, I'm very familiar with the southwestern part of the United States. And I thought that this was an appropriate metaphor for meeting with all of you, based, I'm assuming, in what's warm San Antonio today. Oh, wait, how do I advance here? Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry. Zoom is new for me, so I'm not quite sure, but I think I've got it. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about my biography with all of you today, not so much as a kind of a chronicle of my life or my career experiences, but as rather a way to demonstrate what I think is really a method in career development for graduate students. And we can talk a little bit about that in the Q&A, but I hope that through this presentation, you might be able to think about method and how you can construct your career while you're still a graduate student. Because the reality is I do not have my PhD yet. I'm finishing up my dissertation while I'm also doing this work. And so I think what I hope to express to you, and the argument that I'm making, is that you can work on your career development while also working on your research and your coursework. So very briefly, I am a first generation college student. So neither one of my parents went to college. And so working on my bachelor's degree and then also going on to work on a master's degree and a PhD is something that was not just important to me, but to my family. And that deeply informs a lot of my research and the work that I do as an advocate of career development for grad students. I grew up in Waukesha, Wisconsin, which is a city of about 65,000 people, about half an hour drive away from downtown Milwaukee, which is where Marquette University is located. So it's about half an hour away from Marquette. I am currently a doctoral candidate in American history at Marquette, and I researched the development of philanthropy and American philanthropic foundations during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a period of time that American historians, if there are no historians in the room, that we refer to as the Gilded Age and Progressive eras. Now, if for those of you who might understand historical methods, for historians, our lived experiences deeply shape the type of research that we conduct. I think historians often would argue that we can't separate our lived experiences and our lives from our interpretation of history and analysis of sources. And so working in wealth management during the Great Recession of about 2006 to 2011, when I worked in wealth management, deeply informs my own personal research. And some of the experiences that I saw and lived through during those moments when I watched clients and people that I worked with have to make some really difficult economic choices, or lose their homes really, or, confront the fact that they had been laid off for anywhere from about 6 months to 2 years in some cases. And so this really does shape, I think, deeply who I am as a scholar and as a historian. So, and as I said, those lived moments really informed my subsequent academic research and now also my work as an advocate for graduate student career development. But then in 2011, I really decided that I wanted to pursue an advanced degree. So I started graduate school at Marquette in history in 2011, and I earned my master's degree in 2013. And then in 2013, I entered the PhD program at Marquette, which was also decided to pursue my PhD at Marquette was something that was also deeply informed by my family and by my lived experiences of being from Milwaukee and the city of Milwaukee in that region. My mother-in-law, this might be a little too personal, but my mother-in-law had battled breast cancer for about 20 years. And when she heard that we were thinking about moving to Virginia, where I had thought about pursuing my PhD, she kind of broke down and started crying. And I recognized that, you know, we couldn't leave the Milwaukee and the city, and that I had to stay with my mother-in-law. So that was actually a personal decision. And so I think thinking about personal decisions and things like family, values, ethics, not just inform where we might decide to pursue our graduate degrees, but also should inform, and it's okay to inform where we want to pursue our future professional careers. And that's one of the things I hope that we argue most especially with Humanities Without Walls Consortium. Oops, wrong one. So now that we've talked a little bit about my personal biography, I wanted to share some deep experiences that I've had while I was a graduate student as kind of a way to demonstrate how these experiences informed and shaped my larger career trajectory. So in 2013, when I was just entering my first year as a PhD student, I spent a summer working as a seminar leader for a history class through Marquette's Educational Opportunity Program. And our EOP program is really Marquette's version of the federally funded TRIO programs that you might have at a school like UTSA. So every summer, Marquette hosts a summer transition to college experience for each incoming freshman class who are members of the EOP program. And this was one of the first experiences for me where I recognized that there are a number of academic support programs in a university where you could still work with students, still teach students, and still, provide support and advice to students, but in a way where you're not a tenure track professor. And so for me, this was deeply informative in that, I could still do these things that drew me to pursue a graduate degree in the first place, which was to educate and train and work with students, but that there are all of these other careers inside a university where you could continue to work with students, but just not as a tenure track professor. And so this was a really, it was a really critical moment for me, I think, in my larger career trajectory. And I worked with EOP for 2 summers in 2013 and 2014. So at a really kind of early period in my life, or at least in my PhD programming. Then in 2016, I had an opportunity to spend 1 semester working in our writing center as a writing center tutor. Our writing center has a number of graduate students who work in the center, providing support to graduate students and to undergraduate students who might be working on their theses or their dissertations. And again, that was another really informative moment for me in thinking about ways that universities structure programming to provide student support. And how you might be able to develop a career outside of a tenure track position. Additionally, in 2015, 2016, I was elected as the president for our history graduate student organization, and I had served in a couple of other positions on our HGSO board before I was elected president. But what was really, I think, critical for my development in my time as president was that year we launched a series of professional development initiatives for our graduate students. Because again, going back to thinking about my biography, I had spent 5 years working in wealth management. And I knew at that time even that the tenure track job market had never recovered from the 2008 recession. And so I was always really kind of concerned about helping our grad students think about their professional development and their career development. So one of the things that we launched while I was president of the HDSO was a collaborative graduate student humanities conference. That was a project between our history department, our English department, Theo, and philosophy. And then we also partnered with another university in Milwaukee, which is called the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, to host this humanities graduate student conference. And now, it wasn't just about helping grad students think about pathways to giving presentations, but it was a way for the students who participated on the organizing committee to understand how a university bureaucracy functions. How can you go about navigating these different spaces to organize a conference? And how do you manage a budget? Because our graduate school at the time gave us a pretty modest budget to to invite in a keynote speaker or to provide catering. And so this was a really critical moment for me because I recognized that a lot of our graduate students don't know how to navigate that bureaucracy because they spend the majority of their time thinking about coursework or thinking about their research or going into archives to do research. So that was a really kind of influential moment for me in thinking about graduate student needs and development needs. Additionally, because of my advocacy and working with our graduate student organization, I was elected to serve as the graduate student representative to Marquette's University Board of Graduate Studies. And our University Board of Graduate Studies does quite a bit of work. So our Dean of the Graduate School, our Associate Deans of the Graduate School, faculty from across the different departments and colleges serve on this board to really set agendas for graduate student programming, or, and making, some really important decisions about the future of the graduate school and the programs that they offer at the master's level and the PhD level, and actually in our professional schools too. So I spent 3 years on that board, and partially because there were never enough graduate students interested in serving on that board. So I don't know what the culture is like at UTSA, but if you have boards across the university that allow graduate students to serve as representatives, I would highly encourage you to spend time and volunteer to serve on those boards. So that one, you learn about the types of decisions that are made in those boards, but then also that's how I got to know our grad school dean. That's how I got to know our associate deans and other faculty members. And so it was a really great networking opportunity for me. And then vice versa, they got to know me a little bit. And this is critical for the next part of my story. But then in 2017, I applied to become a member of the Humanities Without Walls Consortium's first national cohort. So as I mentioned earlier, the Humanities Without Walls Consortium was formed in 2014. And one of the major initiatives that the consortium funds is what we call a predoctoral career development or career diversity workshop. And this is a workshop that invites 30 graduate students in PhD programs in the humanities to come to Chicago for 3 weeks every summer to spend time discerning career values, thinking about and exploring a variety of different career pathways, and building community with other members of their cohort. And in 2015 and 2016, the consortium opened up the workshop to only students who were members of or who were students enrolled in the consortium schools. In 2017, it was the first year where the consortium and the Mellon Foundation decided this should be a national cohort. And at the time, Marquette was not a member of the consortium, so it was the first time that I was able to, that Marquette or other non-consortium schools were able to apply. And I went, I was selected as Marquette's nominee, and then I was selected as a fellow. And I will say this, that it was one of those truly transformative moments in my life. And I became obsessed with not just thinking about what are my potential future career pathways, but how do I bring this back to my colleagues at Marquette, right? People who I had spent time working with in the EOP program or in the Writing Center or in my HDSO cohort and the people with whom I worked in planning our grad student humanities conference. And so I spent probably the next 6 to 7 months thinking about, after I came back from that experience in the summer of 2017, so the next 6 to 7 months thinking about how do we build this type of programming at Marquette? Because at the time we didn't have any real career development programming support for graduate students at the university level or at the grad school level. So, and this is where I come to my last point, to talking about collaboration. So I was able to use all of those experiences in working for EOP and working with our HGSO and working with our UBGS and the relationships I had built through my time spent on the UBGS board to propose an idea to our grad school dean. And I sent him an email, and he knew me. So, he knew me a little bit from my time on the UBGS board. I sent him an email, and he also knew that I was a fellow with HWW in 2017. And I emailed him, and I said, can we meet? Because I have this idea, and I would really like to pitch it to you. And he said, sure, come on in. So we had a meeting, and I pitched an idea to him that Marquette ought to consider developing a shortened version of the HWW workshop, but one that was unique to the local context and needs of Marquette University. So he loved the idea. And literally within 2 minutes, he was like, let's do it. And not only that, he said, Maggie, I'm going to fund you to do this, because I was willing to to build this programming for free, which I would not encourage anyone to do. Grad students get paid for your labor. But at the time, I was really kind of, lit on fire, and I wanted to do something to help my university and my fellow colleagues. So I was going to do it for free, but fortunately, my grad dean said, no, we're going to fund you to do this. And it turned into what is now the Marquette Career Diversity Initiative. And we launched it with our first Career Diversity Symposium that we held in the fall of 2018, where we invited our PI for the consortium, Antoinette Burton, and my colleague, Jason Myrick, whose face I see up on my Zoom screen right now, who's with us. Jason is the Director of Operations for HWW, and they came to Marquette to talk about the second national call for fellows that was held in 2019. But we really used their willingness to come to Marquette to talk about the fellowship, and we turned it into a project that launched this conversation on our campus. So it was a full day of events and really rooted in thinking about what could the university do to build this career diversity programming on campus. Then in May of 2019, the idea that I pitched to my grad dean turned into a 1-week career development boot camp that we developed and hosted for all of our graduate students at Marquette. So our HWW hosts humanities PhD students. Based on what our needs are at Marquette, we recognized, no, we need to open up this training to master's students and PhD students, and to not just humanities students, but to STEM and social science students and our professional students as well. Because I think one of the things that I was really struck by as I kind of led some of these conversations when I came back from the fellowship, STEM students are worried about their career development as much, if not more so, than humanities students. At least they are at Marquette. And for a number of them, they didn't know, how do I go about writing a job, writing a cover letter? How do I go about transforming my CV into a resume? And, especially if they wanted to go into industry with their degree in chemistry or their degree in biomedical or biomechanical engineering. So we decided that we really had to have whatever programming we developed had to include all graduate students. Additionally, because of this work that we led at Marquette, Antoinette and Jason invited me to come back to HWW to help guide the planning for the HWW Career Development Workshop in 2019 in Chicago. So that was kind of, having that relationship with them and launching the symposium really brought us back into conversation. And that's really how I came back into the work that I'm now guiding and helping support at the consortium. So I was there in Chicago planning. John Schaffer from UTSA was one of our speakers in 2019. So I think that this idea of collaboration is not just at your university, not just in the spaces where you might have fellowships, but outside at other universities who might be doing the work that you find meaningful and important as well. And then as a part of that, we all worked together to help. The Mellon Foundation invited HWW to write a renewal grant in 2019 and 2020. And we learned in June of 2020 that the Mellon Foundation renewed our work for the next 5 years. And that's how I have now transitioned into my role as the Associate Director of Career Diversity for the consortium. at Marquette University. So the last part of that is that Marquette University, as a part of that renewal grant, was invited to become the 16th member of the consortium. So, I think I point to all of this and this metaphor of climbing up a mountain together, because that is especially true, I think, for my career. It's not something that I just did on my own, but it's something that I facilitated in collaboration with the dean of my grad school, with my PI for HWW, Antoinette Burton, with my director of operations for HWW, with my colleague Peggy, who also works for the consortium, and with all the grad students and the grad school support staff at Marquette as well. So it's really been a collaborative endeavor. And I think that is something that I especially needed to highlight as I talk about my career journey. So now, the other reason I'm here today is to talk a little bit more about the Humanities Without Walls Fellowship and encourage the great students at UTSA to consider applying for our fellowship for 2021. I love this image of HWW, especially because the green highlights the schools and the places where the consortium schools are located and based in. I know it looks a little odd that we've got Pennsylvania and Nebraska on the outskirts, but I think it's just a great visual to explain where we're located in the nation. So very briefly, to introduce to you what the fellowship exactly is, we call it the Predoctoral Career Diversity Fellowship. It is, and as I mentioned, it is a 3-week workshop traditionally held in Chicago, but because of the pandemic and the virus, we decided that the workshop would have to be virtual for 2021. This year, we'll be selecting 30 PhD students in the humanities from US-based universities, but you can be an international student if you're working on a PhD at a US university. It provides a $5,000 stipend for the summer, which is a nice stipend, I know from personal experience. And one of the requirements is that you must not graduate or deposit your dissertation before the start of the workshop. So technically you could defend, but if you haven't graduated and you haven't deposited it yet, and you don't graduate till maybe, September 1st or in the fall, you're good to apply. And really there are a number of methods that we try to emphasize through the structure of the 3 weeks of the workshop. But I think most especially what we try to model is to help graduate students explore a variety of career paths that are open to them with a PhD in the humanities. And in using the kind of a Jesuit term, right, because Marquette University is a Jesuit university, a discernment process to help you recognize what some of those pathways might be for you. But most importantly, we try to ground that in what do you as a PhD student find meaningful in the work that you do as a scholar or in the work that you do as an educator, and how is it consistent with your values and your own personal system of ethics. And I found, and I can say this from firsthand experience, that process empowers graduate students to define this process and this work for themselves. So, sometimes, that I think that there's a culture in the academy which prioritizes certain career outcomes over others. And at HWW, we are really career agnostics. Whatever you find, or whatever you find meaningful or valuable or ethical, is ultimately what we want you to do with your lives. And I can say from my own cohort in 2017, this is deeply powerful work. I think in some cases, members of my cohort found that process to be cathartic, liberating, and a chance for them to really say, no, I don't want to be a tenure track professor. That might not be what I want to do with my life. And you know what? That's okay. But again, for some fellows, they recognize, gosh, you know what? I love educating students. I do want to become a tenure track professor. So here's what I need to do next to go and pursue those pathways for myself. And so it reinforces the tenure track and the pursuit of the tenure track for a number of our fellows. And in fact, I think some of our data demonstrates that of our now almost 150 fellows who've come through the program, that we have a higher placement rate of fellows going into tenure track positions than the normal or the average. So I think that is it, other than I wanted to briefly share my contact info with all of you. You can reach me on Twitter at Vile Historian is my handle. You can also follow the HWW Consortium at HWW_consortium. Please, if you have questions for me, please feel free to email me at Margaret.Nettesheim-Hoffman, which I know is a ridiculously long last name. So yeah, but Marquette puts the whole thing in there. So feel free to email me at that email address, or visit our Humanities Without Walls website at humanitieswithoutwalls.illinois.edu. And I think if Peggy and Jason, if you guys want to, if we can share your email addresses in the chat, please feel free to reach out to any of us. We love working with students, and we want to help guide all of you, even if you don't become a fellow or decide not to apply. We're here to support you, and to also, I think, learn as much as we can from all of you as well, right? Getting back to that collaboration and seeing us all in this work together. So I think that's it for my presentation. So I will stop my share.